You know what's funny about being a therapist? People think you have all the answers, that you can read minds and predict behavior. The truth is, I'm just really good at understanding what makes people tick. And after what I've been through, I need to tell someone who won't judge me. Someone who'll actually listen to my side. Anyway, make sure to hit that like button if you enjoy my videos, and don't forget to subscribe if you're new here. I'm Reagan. I'm 29, and I work as a therapist. My husband Corey is 30, does construction and renovation work. We just bought our first house together, which should have been this amazing milestone, right? But here's the thing. While I was trying to maintain some semblance of a social life and career, Corey became completely obsessed with that house. Every single evening, every weekend, he was there with his tools and his little projects, acting like the world's most dedicated handyman. I mean, I get it. The place needed work. But watching him sand floors and paint walls for months on end, it was suffocating. He'd come home covered in dust, talking about crown molding and electrical outlets like they were the most fascinating things in the world. Meanwhile, I'm dealing with actual human psychology all day, helping people navigate complex emotional situations, and he wants to discuss whether we should use eggshell or satin finish paint. That's when I started going out more with some new friends I'd met. There was this whole group of us who'd get together for drinks, actual intellectual conversations, the kind where people discuss books and music and ideas that matter. And Jeff was part of that group. Look, I'm not going to pretend Jeff didn't catch my attention immediately. He's a musician, plays guitar, actually reads literature, the kind of person who can hold a real conversation about something other than home improvement projects. When I was around him, I felt like myself again. Not just Corey's wife who was supposed to be grateful for new kitchen cabinets. One evening, after spending time with the group, I came home and Corey was there in his work clothes, looking at me with those puppy dog eyes he gets when he thinks something's wrong. I don't know what came over me, but I just said it. I don't trust myself around Jeff. I expected him to, show some backbone, get angry, demand answers. Instead, he just looked at me with this wounded expression and said, "I trust you not to do anything stupid. Just be sensible about what time and how you spend your time with him." That response told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in our marriage. A real man would have set boundaries. A confident husband would have said something like, "Then don't put yourself in that situation." But Corey? He just rolled over and played dead, like always. Between us, that reaction made me lose even more respect for him. If he wasn't going to fight for me, why should I fight for him? I kept spending time with Jeff and our friends, going out while Corey worked late on the house. It started making him uncomfortable, which honestly felt like too little, too late. Finally, he worked up the nerve to express his feelings about it, but even then, he couldn't be direct. He just said it upset him and he didn't need to deal with this right now. I told him Jeff and I were just friends, because we were. Nothing physical had happened. But I could see Corey's insecurity eating at him, and part of me thought, good, maybe now you'll actually act like you want to keep me around. Then Jeff's partner, some jealous woman, forbade him from speaking to me. Just like that, he ghosted me completely. I was devastated. Actually devastated. More upset than I should have been over losing a friend, and I knew it. But I couldn't help how I felt. Corey saw how destroyed I was and had the audacity to seem hurt by my reaction. Like, excuse me? I'm going through something emotionally difficult, and you're making it about yourself? He asked me to proofread a message I wanted to send Jeff. And when he read it, he said, "This is a breakup message." The way he said it, like he was accusing me of something. I made him admit that Jeff and I were just friends. Because we were. I hadn't done anything wrong, but Corey was acting like I'd committed some crime by caring about another person. A few weeks later, Jeff came back on the scene. He'd broken up with his controlling girlfriend, and I told Corey I was going to talk to him but would be careful with boundaries. Corey said he was uncomfortable with it, but what was I supposed to do? Live my life according to his insecurities? The night I went to Jeff's place, we really did just talk and play guitar. We connected on this deep level that I'd forgotten was possible. It was 2 in the morning when I realized how late it was, but I didn't want to leave. We were having actual meaningful conversations about music, about life, about things that mattered. When I finally got home at 5 a.m., Corey was waiting up for me like some kind of worried parent. "Where have you been?" he demanded, and I explained exactly where I'd been. I told him Jeff and I played guitar and talked. The truth. But Corey couldn't handle it. "You can't do that," he said, like he had any right to control my movements. I took great offense to that. Here I was, being completely transparent about my friendship, and he was trying to control me like I was some kind of possession. "You're being controlling and misogynistic," I told him, because that's exactly what it was. I'm a grown woman. I can spend time with my friends if I want to. The fact that he was upset about it was his problem to deal with, not mine. Between us, I think Corey never learned how to handle a strong, independent woman. He wanted some submissive little housewife who'd sit at home while he played with power tools. That's not who I am. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags in his behavior. The monitoring, the questions, the way he tried to make me feel guilty for having a social life. Classic controlling behavior that I'd recognize immediately in a client. We were definitely on rocky ground after that. Corey was convinced I was having an emotional affair, which was ridiculous. I was just finally connecting with someone who appreciated my mind instead of seeing me as some kind of domestic accessory. Then in October, everything changed. Corey's mother died suddenly. I felt terrible for him. I really did. He'd lost his father when he was young, so this left him completely alone in terms of family. The grief hit him hard, and I tried to be supportive. But the way he handled it, and more importantly, the way he expected me to handle it, showed me a side of him I didn't like. The day after she died, we were at the pub with Diana, one of his friends. She asked me how I was coping, and I mentioned that I was worried everyone would forget that my mother had died too. Look, my mom passed away 3 or 4 years ago after a long illness. I lived in her house with my family during the entire lockdown, watching her deteriorate, taking care of her for over a year. I knew what grief looked like, what it felt like to lose a parent. But apparently expressing concern that my loss would be overshadowed made me selfish. Corey gave me this look like I'd said something unforgivable. Like my grief had an expiration date, just because his was fresh. A day later, I told him I was going to see Jeff again. I needed some normalcy, some connection with someone who understood me. Corey made it clear he was uncomfortable with this timing, like my friendships should be put on hold because of his family situation. "I know it's just your friend, and there's nothing actually happening," he said. "But this does upset me, and I don't need to deal with this right now." The entitlement in that statement was staggering. I understood he was grieving, but that didn't give him the right to control who I spent time with. I told him I understood his feelings, and that this would be the last time I'd see Jeff for a while. We had plans to see a jazz band in a few weeks, but I'd cancel that because of the funeral. I went to Jeff's for a couple of hours, and when I came back, nothing had changed. Corey was still wallowing in his grief, still expecting me to revolve my entire existence around his emotional state. The following week we had a spa trip planned that I'd bought for us. Well, that he'd paid for as my Christmas gift, but whatever. I thought it might help us reconnect, help him relax and process his grief in a healthy way. It was actually lovely at first. We both needed the break, and I was able to decompress from all the emotional labor I'd been doing, supporting him through his loss. But on the last day, while we were in the hot tub sharing a cocktail, I was texting Jeff about meeting up the next day. We were working on my thesis together. He had insights into the musical therapy aspects I was exploring. Corey saw me messaging and immediately got defensive. "I thought you weren't seeing him anymore," he said. "It's just a study session," I explained. "I'm falling behind on my thesis." Which was true. Between supporting Corey through his grief and dealing with his emotional neediness, my academic work was suffering. The next day, I got up early to meet Jeff. We agreed I'd be back by lunch, but the study session turned into this amazing intellectual discussion. We grabbed lunch and kept talking, and when I texted Corey to let him know I'd be staying longer, he didn't respond. His silence was clearly meant to manipulate me into coming home, But I wasn't going to play those games. If he couldn't be mature enough to respond to a simple text, that was his choice. Jeff and I ended up having dinner and drinks, continuing our conversation about my research. I didn't get home until after Corey had gone to bed. The next morning, he confronted me like I'd committed some terrible crime. "Do you think any of that was okay?" he demanded. Apparently, it was all my fault because I didn't reply to him fast enough. My lack of immediate response was emotionally blackmailing her to come home, he claimed. The mental gymnastics were incredible. I hadn't been emotionally blackmailing anyone. I'd been living my life and pursuing my academic goals while he sulked at home. I tried to explain that I just needed some space to deal with everything, that I didn't want my phone on me while I was working. Maybe it was a little thoughtless, but I was dealing with my own stress about my thesis, about supporting him through his grief, about everything. But according to Corey, I was the terrible person for not keeping my phone attached to my hip in case he decided to change his mind about my plans. A week went by, and it was the day before we were supposed to leave for his hometown for the funeral. That's when I asked if we could delay our departure by one day so I could go to the jazz concert with Jeff. The look on Corey's face was like I'd suggested we skip the funeral entirely. "You said that wasn't happening," he said. "That's why you saw him earlier, because you weren't doing that." I explained that I knew what I'd said, but I really wanted to go to this concert. It was important to me, for my research and for my own emotional well-being. I'd been sacrificing so much to support him through this difficult time. That's when he said something that really showed his true colors. "I really don't feel like I'm your top priority. Please elaborate." So I did. I told him that I don't see relationships as hierarchies. Everyone in my life is important to me. My friends, my family, my husband, they're all part of my circle. And I don't rank people like they're competing for my attention. "But I'm your husband," he said, "and my mom just died. Does that not put me ahead of anybody else?" I looked him straight in the eye and said no. Because grief doesn't give someone the right to control their partner. Marriage doesn't mean I stop being my own person, with my own needs and relationships. He told me to go to my jazz concert, that he didn't care anymore. But then he added, "The damage is already done, just by me asking." The manipulation in that statement was unbelievable. He was trying to make me feel guilty for even wanting to maintain my own interests and friendships during his time of grief. I went to the concert, and it was exactly what I needed. Jeff and I had this incredible evening talking about music, about life, about things that actually mattered. For a few hours, I felt like myself again, instead of just Corey's grief support system. The funeral went fine. Corey focused on his family and the ceremony, and I was there to support him when he needed it. For a week, things felt almost normal between us. But on the drive home, I decided to be completely honest with him about something that had been on my mind. I told him that I thought my ex-boyfriend from school was the one that got away. The statement was true, and Corey deserved to know where he stood in my romantic history. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was trying to be transparent about my feelings. He seemed dumbfounded, which surprised me. The idea wasn't that outrageous. People have past relationships that meant something to them. The fact that he couldn't handle that level of emotional honesty showed how immature he really was. The next day, we were having coffee, and I decided to continue being honest about my feelings. "I never wanted this house," I told him. "I never wanted this dog, and I don't want kids." These were all true statements about how I was feeling. The house had become this prison where Corey spent all his time on projects, instead of focusing on our relationship. The dog was his idea, something he'd pushed for. And kids? I'd never been sure about that, but being married to someone so emotionally needy had made me realize I definitely didn't want to add children to the mix. I was trying to be honest about the foundation of our marriage, about the future we'd planned that I wasn't sure I wanted anymore. But instead of engaging with my concerns maturely, Corey started crying. I was genuinely shocked by his reaction. I hadn't expected him to be so fragile about an honest conversation about our relationship. "I didn't expect you to be so upset," I told him, because I really hadn't. I thought we could have a mature discussion about our future without him falling apart. The next day, I went to Sky's place to talk through everything. The whole situation was overwhelming. Corey's grief, his increasing neediness, my own feelings about our relationship. I needed perspective from someone who wasn't emotionally invested in the outcome. That's when it occurred to me that maybe Corey was trying to get me to break up with him. Maybe he was sabotaging everything because he didn't want to be the one to end things. Especially right after his mother's death. It would make him look like the bad guy. But I was in no state to make major life decisions. I was dealing with his grief, my own stress about my thesis, and the realization that I might not want the life we'd built together. Sky gave me good advice. I didn't need to decide anything right away. That took some pressure off, gave me time to think clearly about what I really wanted. Around this time, I told Corey I was going out with Jeff again. I was resigned to his disapproval at this point. I couldn't keep walking on eggshells around his insecurities. When I came back at 4 in the morning, I was high from the MDMA Jeff and I had taken together. It had been this incredible experience. We'd connected on this deep emotional level, and Jeff had confessed his feelings for me. I was totally shocked by his confession, but also not surprised. The chemistry between us had been building for months. Under the influence of the drug, everything felt more honest, more real. When I told Corey about Jeff's confession, he said, "Whatever," like he didn't care anymore. But I could see the hurt in his eyes, the way he was shutting down emotionally. The next day, we were driving somewhere, I can't remember exactly where, but Corey said something that just set me off. I think it was along the lines of not understanding why I was so upset with him. That's when I lost it. I was furious, worn down from months of his emotional manipulation and neediness. For the first time in our relationship, I raised my voice. I started shouting at him, listing all the ways he'd been cutting me apart while I was trying to support him through his grief. In my anger, I raised my hand and brought my fist down on the steering wheel. It made this loud bang, and suddenly Corey's entire demeanor changed. "You're scary," he said, cowering in the passenger seat. "You're just like my aggressive father." The comparison was ridiculous and hurtful. I'd never been violent toward him, never threatened him. I'd hit the steering wheel in frustration, something anyone might do when they're upset. But he was acting like I'd attacked him personally. I tried defending myself, but Corey was already creating this narrative where I was the dangerous one. He was so mentally and emotionally fragile that a moment of justified anger became potential abuse in his mind. He started saying I was potentially abusive, that he couldn't trust me to have children because I might become violent in the future. Never mind that I'd already told him I didn't want children. Now he was using my moment of frustration as justification for questioning my entire character. I started doubting myself. Maybe I had lost control? Maybe my outburst was more threatening than I remembered? Corey was so convincing in his victim narrative that I began wondering if I'd blocked out part of what happened. He told me I needed to go to therapy to sort myself out. As long as I went along with his version of events, he was supportive. But the moment I questioned his interpretation, I became terrible and hurtful and potentially dangerous. The gaslighting was masterful, really. He'd turned my justified anger about his emotional manipulation into evidence that I was the problem in our relationship. That's when I knew I had to end things. If he was going to paint me as an abuser for expressing frustration, there was no future for us. He was using his grief and his family trauma to manipulate me into accepting blame for all our problems. 2 days after I moved out, I made my relationship with Jeff official. It felt natural after months of emotional connection. We understood each other in ways Corey never could. My family initially believed Corey's version of events, but when I explained how controlling and emotionally manipulative he'd become, especially after his mother's death, they started to understand. Jessica, my pregnant sister, eventually came around when she heard the full story from my perspective. Some of our mutual friends refused to meet Jeff at first, clearly taking Corey's side without hearing mine. But I didn't need their approval to be happy. Real friends would have supported me through a difficult time, instead of judging me for finding happiness with someone who actually appreciated me. Jeff and I have been together for over a year now, and it's been incredible. He challenges me intellectually, supports my career goals, and treats me like an equal partner instead of some kind of emotional support animal. My therapy practice has grown significantly since I left Corey. I think going through that experience gave me deeper insights into toxic relationship patterns, emotional manipulation, and the way people use grief and trauma to control their partners. I occasionally hear updates about Corey through mutual acquaintances. Apparently, he's dating someone now, some quiet woman who probably doesn't challenge him the way I did. I feel sorry for her, really. She has no idea what she's gotten herself into. Sometimes people ask if I regret how things ended, if I could have handled it differently. The truth is, I tried everything to make that relationship work. I supported him through his mother's death. I was patient with his emotional neediness. I tried to be honest about my feelings and concerns. But Corey couldn't handle being married to a strong, independent woman. He wanted someone who would sacrifice her own identity to prop up his fragile ego. When I refused to play that role, he turned me into the villain of his story. I know what really happened in our marriage. I know the difference between justified anger and abuse, between healthy boundaries and controlling behavior. My professional training taught me to recognize manipulation tactics, and Corey used every one of them. The irony is that his behavior toward the end, the gaslighting, the emotional manipulation, the attempts to isolate me from my friends, that was actually abusive. But he projected all of that onto me because I had the audacity to hit a steering wheel when I was frustrated. Jeff understands me in ways Corey never could. He appreciates my intelligence, my independence, my career goals. He doesn't try to control my friendships or make me feel guilty for having interests outside our relationship. I'm grateful every day that I had the strength to leave when I did. Corey's behavior was escalating, and I hate to think what might have happened if I'd stayed longer. The hardest part is knowing that people probably believe his version of events. He's probably told everyone that I had an affair, that I abandoned him during his time of grief, that I was emotionally abusive. But the people who matter, the people who really know me, they understand what actually happened. I've learned to trust my instincts about people and relationships. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. Corey showed me that he was emotionally manipulative, controlling, and incapable of handling an equal partnership. I'm just glad I recognized it before I wasted any more years of my life trying to fix something that was fundamentally broken.